I was wondering, because once again, when I heard that the House had turned it down,
right.
and then later on, it's like another weekend, they're threatening us with depression and all that, which was created, when I say created by them, by a lot of the decisions that they made, let alone that central bank. And then they come back and say, well, the Senate has turned around and put it back upon the House. I couldn't figure out legally how they could do that.
Well, they couldn't, but the reality is the courts are probably not going to look at that. They don't want to get themselves involved in the internal intricacies of political manipulation in Congress. But you can see the reason. Congress had turned this down, the House had turned it down. It was pretty unlikely that the House was going to bring up another bill on the same subject. Therefore, they needed the end run, and they had the people in the Senate who were willing to play this game. And then the House, instead of turning around and saying, which they should have, wait a minute, you're playing a game on us, this is a subterfuge, we in the House are going to reject this on the constitutional principle. What did the House do? Turned around and rolled over for them.
You bet. And
right?
and 57 of them are somewhat changed their vote from what they were.
That's right.
Yeah, and it was. I found it very interesting when it looked at the money that was spent into campaigns by the bankers to those individuals who changed their vote compared to the ones who maintained their vote. Rather interesting stuff.
Well, that's kind of to be expected.
Oh God.
Right?
Anything we subsidize, we shall control.
That's
right. Yeah.
You got it.
It's back to the Fed and to the actual money supply and the overabundance of money, let alone the fact that I feel we've been able to export our inflation because we've got the world to take our currency. At what point do you think the world is going to stop wanting Federal Reserve notes?
Well, you see, that's the key. For years and years and years, we've been able to export this currency and bring in real goods because that currency was the most stable, relatively speaking, of all the other currencies. After World War II, this country was the only one that was really in an untouched position. Right? Militarily, politically, economically, we were the most stable. All right, but at a certain point in time, these foreign countries looking at what we've been doing to this currency are going to say, wait a minute, this is no longer the most stable currency. In fact, it's an asset that is losing value much more rapidly than we can gain interest or whatever through the use of it. At that point, they're going to say, we are going to change over to some other currency. We're going to repatriate this Federal Reserve currency back to the United States. There's a huge inflow of currency, and then what happens? Inflation.
That's kind of expecting that. The other thing I was considering was, with now that foreigners have all this currency, and let alone all those treasury bills and treasury notes, they also stand to the opportunity, of course, use it to do something, tangible, like buy American businesses, whatever.
Well, that's exactly
buy
what they'll do.
infrastructure that are being sold, that kind of thing.
That's exactly what they'll do until at some point the inflow becomes so great that even Congress will say, no, we're going to have a two-tier monetary system. We're not going to allow you to bring that currency in. Or if you do it, it'll be 50 cents on the dollar. Or we won't allow you to buy certain kinds of assets. You can't buy industry. You can't buy this. You can't buy that.
Which will make them dump the dollar even quicker because now it's like we're holding dollars that don't have the,
That's right, but the other alternative is to have a revolt of the people when they discover the Chinese own all our homes.
Yeah.
You say? That's why I say they're riding a tiger. Whichever way they move on this, they can have economic catastrophe, they can have political catastrophe, and the only solution, not for them so much, but for the country, is to begin changing over this system with an alternative currency mechanism so that the market in this country can begin to equilibrate and phase the Federal Reserve System out as quickly as possible. It's going to be phased out anyway by economics, and if we don't control the method, somebody else is going to end up controlling it.
And hopefully we don't go for the problem, reaction, solution thing where they created this problem and then we react to it and they, of course, show up as our saviors with some solution for it. My next one is, in history, this isn't the first time in history, of course, that they've taken places down financially, to get the political gains that they want. For our viewers, the term, I'm trying to think, the robber barons, the money trust. If you go back in time, this country has faced this before, right? When I say faced it, they've faced the people manipulating the markets and or the currency to a point where they're manipulating the economy.
Well, we've had it both at the state level with state banking systems using fractional reserve, primarily before the Civil War. We had it afterwards with what was called the national banking system that actually still exists. It's part of the Federal Reserve. There were a series of what they used to call stringencies or panics in the banking system, which were in a sense orchestrated, whether they were caused or not directly. The banking system and the high finance people used those as a rationale for centralizing more power. That was really the argument for the Federal Reserve. Look, we've had all these stringencies, we've had all these crises.
If we just had one central power.
If we only had one central bank where we could scientifically manage this currency, we could remove all of these problems. All right, so we have the central bank set up in 1913. Immediately they have a depression, 1921. The biggest depression in American history, 1930, 28, 29, 30, 32, right? That whole period. they had to go off the gold standard. They had to go off any kind of backing,
Right, because they
domestically and internationally, because they couldn't maintain it in the fractional reserve system. At that point, they told us, well, we don't need gold anymore. Right, we're going to run this system on a fiat basis. And now we see the biggest consequence of all. They apparently are going to take the whole world down.
For my viewers that might have a couple gray hairs, the time when they took us off the gold system and stuff, that was in the Nixon era with the Bank of International Settlements?
It was in 1933 first with Franklin Roosevelt domestically. Remember, he called in all the gold, outlawed gold contracts, and that was the domestic removal of gold. You still had international gold payments because obviously we were dealing with foreign countries that we couldn't control. Nixon took us off in 1971 because there had been so much inflation during the 60s under Johnson. Excellent. And there was a huge gold outflow.
Edwin, thank you very much. The people of Sharon, thank you. You're the man.
You.
Appreciate you coming.